Welcome to the Dynamic Leadership live event series. This is talk number 2, where we explore the pressure curve, why capable leaders sometimes perform differently when the stakes rise, and how small adjustments in regulation can unlock far more of the capabilities that they already possess. Welcome to the Dynamic Leadership live event series. This is talk number 2 of 6 in the series, where we explore the pressure curve, why capable leaders sometimes perform differently when the stakes rise, and how small adjustments in regulation can unlock far more of the capabilities they already possess. In the last talk, we introduced the concept of allostasis. The central idea was simple but important. Performance does not remain stable as demands increase unless the system itself adapts. Homeostasis is like our default and stabilizes the system at the status quo. Allostasis stabilizes the system while the demands on the system rise. We have to take charge of the increasing demand on ourselves because the environment won't do it naturally for a variety of reasons. Today, we take the next step by looking at the pressure curve. One of the most common experiences in leadership is that success at one level does not guarantee success at the next level. Back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, there's a lot of talk about the Peter principle. This is what's at play with the Peter principle, that people get promoted to one level above where they can be effective. Now we understand what that's about, and we don't have to, one, as leaders, succumb to it, and two, for the people we're developing and promoting, we can build this in so they don't hit that Peter principle. The external task may look the same, but the internal environment changes dramatically as the stakes rise. The same conversion feels different when the consequences are larger. The same decision feels different when more people depend on the outcome. And something interesting happens when expectations rise, not only from others, but from ourselves. When people increase their expectations of their own performance, they often create internal pressure, which interferes with the very performance they're trying to improve. There's a lot, if you've worked in sports, you know that there's this tricky thing of trying to balance. Well, we'll talk about that today because there's a structure behind it. Research on performance psychology and stress regulation consistently shows that performance improves with moderate pressure, but begins to decline when the internal load exceeds the system's regulatory capacity. This is often described as the inverted U. Too little stimulation and performance is flat. Optimal pressure and performance rises. Too much internal load and cognitive bandwidth begins to narrow. What's important here is that the decline is not primarily about knowledge. Most leaders already know what they should do. The problem appears when internal regulation does not scale with the demands of the situation. This is why development must become intentional. When we were younger, roughly from early adolescence into our 20s, performance often improved simply because we showed up. The brain was still developing, so there was an abundance of neurotransmitter systems available. The system was active, and exposure to challenge naturally strengthened neural circuits. This is the wrapping of neurons with myelin. That's what locks in habits and makes them the path of least resistance. But later in life, the process becomes less automatic. High performers begin designing their own development environments. Law school, medical school, athletics, martial arts, and even the skate park all follow the same underlying principle: progressively increasing challenge that pushes the system to adapt. This is where the 7 factors we discussed begin to matter: novelty, intention, precision, complexity, progression, bursts of intensity, and working at the edge of ability. And this is what we describe with the U curve. When those elements are present, the system adapts. When they're absent, development stalls. That's the homeostasis, stability at the status quo. And this brings us back to leadership. As organizations grow and volatility increases, leaders are not simply managing strategy or operations, they're managing internal load, their own internal load And just as importantly, the internal load the organization is causing for the people in it. Too many leaders abdicate their responsibility to manage the state of their team. They expect that their team members should do like what they perceive they did, and that's regulate themselves. And yes, there may be some truth to that, but I'll share a moment in a illustration what could be going on, and just to shine some light on the actual crux of the situation. Stability under pressure becomes the foundational capability that allows everything else they know to remain accessible. The focus is on working on the things you can control and influence, and that's leading. So what I want to do here is take a look at what's going on with this development of others while maintaining our own load. So last week I introduced the inverted U. And we said if it's too low, the load and the demands in the situation, and if it's too high, performance stalls. On the one side, it's disengagement or boredom. And on the other side, it could be overwhelm, fight or flight, catastrophization. All of those things impact performance. In here is the optimal pressure. Well, here's what's interesting. Balancing this is a proactive process. When you're balancing it for yourself, you may not even notice when you drop to here. This has to be very proactive, because if you don't pay attention to it in a proactive way with a plan, with some intention, you'll easily slip to here. And once you slip to here, you have less access because you're not engaged. Once you slip to here, you have less access because the system is focusing on threat. Once the system focuses on threat, you don't have the ability that you think you do, or that you do. It's just not, you have it, but it's not accessible. And this is let's say that this is the self. Now think about how hard it is to manage this inverted U for yourself and staying in this optimal pressure zone. So this is the green zone where we want to be. This is struggle at the edge of ability. So you're going to struggle at the edge. And by struggling at the edge of ability, you're getting a second benefit, which is the wrapping of myelins. I kind of mentioned this in the introduction. So when we use deep practice, a big part of deep practice is struggle at the edge of ability, because it signals to the central nervous system that this, whatever it is important. And that generates neurotransmitter, but it also starts to wrap those neurons with myelin, and they fire faster, stronger, and with more accuracy. This is what's at play when a Kobe Bryant or a Steph Curry talk about being in the gym for so long practicing these shots, is they're building myelin, because they're not just practicing shots. Same way with Tiger Woods, when he talks about his father used to make a lot of noise while he was making shots, because he never let his son use an excuse that there was some distraction. They were building myelin around the neurons. They didn't know that at the time, but that's what was happening. And that myelin makes those neural pathways the path of least resistance. So you can build in the management of pressure through this deep practice approach. I don't want to get too far, of course. And then let's say you now are also, as the leader, as you should, taking on the responsibility to work on what's going on with other people. And again, we want to keep them in this zone. I've seen too many situations. I've done it myself way too many times, where you let people disengage while you're waiting to figure stuff out, or while you're waiting for information to come through, or you let people go into overwhelm and threat because you've pushed the pressure onto them. This is why I talk about building in a pause. The leader has to regulate themselves. Now, emotional intelligence talks a lot about this. What emotional intelligence doesn't have is the dynamic part of it, which is what dynamic leadership adds, which is doing it real time at the millisecond level. Emotional intelligence, when it was created, we didn't understand some of what we do now about how the brain works. And you'll notice that the emotional intelligence talks a lot about the amygdala, the basal ganglia, hippocampus, etc. But you can't, that's not actionable. You can't move information from one to the other actively. But they're all made of neurons. They're all consisting of neurons. We have 100 billion neurons. They all have different purposes, etc. But they all behave the same. Deep practice forms myelin. Myelin forms the path of least resistance. Synaptogenesis moves the neurotransmitter, the synapses, to the active neural pathways and away from the ones that aren't being used. So to improve skill, we have to make sure we have an abundance of neurotransmitters so we can keep the old ones active as well as the new ones. And there's ways that you can improve the neurotransmitter. Now, when you're working with other people, you have to be able to sense this. I talk about this in some of the leadership series, is that by the time they're voicing it, it's too late. You have to pick. Here's why it's too late. If you think about time, so this is time, and this is the unconscious. That hands off to the conscious. And if I draw one line of effort to regulate, this is a regulation graph, or modulation, regulation. And there's zones. This is prevention. This is modulation. And this is correction or corrective. I'll use the same form, call it correction. And all of this is regulation. Most of emotional intelligence, and I'm not knocking emotional intelligence, is solid work. But the solutions, the actions are here on this end. Dynamic leadership, the actions are here on the prevention end. And in the middle is the last line of defense. So we want to catch it before here. And here's why. If I do the effort curve, and we'll make this one green. I don't know if you can tell the difference in colors, but anyway, the effort curve on the unconscious side is very, very low. And then it slightly increases. And when it gets to the unconscious side, it spikes and then it goes up. And the longer the time, so let's call this one second. Now that seems like a little bit ambitious. What are you talking about? How are we going to fix this stuff in a second? It's because the unconscious side processes at 11 million bits per second because it's neural pathways. It's energy flowing through the neural pathways. The neural pathways are built with neurons and synapses, but the ones that get wrapped with myelin make them the path of least resistance. They're the ones that fire faster, stronger, more accuracy, and more readily. And what we're doing is instead of using language and conscious thought, what we're doing is picking up on the sensations that happen within the body, because the network of neurons is physiological. The body is going to respond to that. This is when Malcolm Gladwell was talking about thin slicing. He touched on this because he said the art experts knew that which piece of art was the fake, but they didn't know why. they're paying attention to the sensation. This is when people say, my intuition tells me. There's a gut feeling you have. They describe it, a gut feeling. And what we want to do is tune into that. When you use that for detection, early detection, and early adjustment. So what do I mean? Early detection, using sensory acuity, you're going to pick up when there's a shift. We don't know what that shift means. We just know that something happened. The blood vessels change. Maybe the face flushes a little bit. Maybe the eyes squint. Maybe they do a little jerk. Something happens. Sometimes they're breathing. This is a good one. The breathing shifts. They tensen up. You can see them tense up. You have to be able to pay attention to it. And it's just practice. You can just start working it. One of the things that I remember from years ago is you turn off the television and watch the body language to start learning. But what gets missed is people think body language is actually telling you specific things. What it's doing is something shifted. You have to ask questions to figure out what it was that actually shifted. Now, if you early detection, we'll put early up here. So early detection. Early detection and adjustment is what allows us to do this in less than 1 second. Over here on this side, you have conscious and later. So this is conscious thought over here. And the reason I put conscious thought is to point out that we have narratives, you have defense, defensiveness, stories, and identity. So what happens is if you catch it early, that sensation, because remember the subconscious is passing information over to the conscious mind. It's forming a response. It's forming a reaction to give to the conscious mind, and then the conscious mind takes their reaction and ideally turns it into a response. What often happens is that reaction becomes the response, especially if people are in threat, which is why we want to keep them from over here. We don't want that. We don't want this because then they're not engaged. So it's managing this proactively, and by the time they voice displeasure or discomfort or dysregulation, it's too late. The same way that a person will endure long periods of dissatisfaction with the service provider before they complain. By the time a person complains, it's pretty far along. Using sensory acuity, you can pick it up early. And then that's this part, early detection. Now, what about the adjustment? You can condition in the adjustment. You start with implementation intentions. When I see this, I'm going to do that. When I see this, I'm going to do that. And you get it to the point where it's just like an athlete who doesn't have to think. You see a soccer player, American football player, they're moving and they see a hole opening. They adjust real time. They don't think. There's no conscious thought. If you ask them, well, how'd you notice that hole? They don't know. They can't tell you because it wasn't a thought. It was an association that moved. But here's what happens. The mind and brain will come up with an answer. And that's what happens over here. If you don't adjust it early enough, then the conscious thought comes in. It creates a narrative. It creates a reason, a story. Next thing you know, they're defending it. Then it's identity. That's why this side is so difficult. That's why this side takes so much effort. Over here, you can condition in and it's simple. It's not rocket science. When you see that shift, you ask the question, what's coming up for you? In coaching, right? You see the shift, what's coming up for you? I noticed, I want to stop here. You don't even have to call them out on it. I want to pause here and just check in because I covered a lot. Just do that. That's all you have to do is condition that in. And when you condition it in, they're going to tell you, and then you can start adjusting the trajectory. Because 9 times out of 10, what came up is an association between what you said and something from the past. That something from the past is a difficulty, a threat, something bad happened, and now they've connected the two. By getting it early, you get it surfaced, and they say, well, yeah, I'm just wondering if blah, 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 right? They're going to make something up, or they're going to make something that's plausible because they're trying to make sense of this sensation. The sensation doesn't have sense. It doesn't have sense until the network of neurons passes off to the conscious mind a thought the conscious mind can perceive. So that's what I'm talking about with this regulating ourselves so that we can regulate others. If we don't regulate ourselves, we're not having access to everything that we're capable of. Now, here's how this looks. Let's say we have a stack. This is without automaticity. And when I say automaticity, I'm talking about conditioning in the things we want at the subconscious level. If you watch guys, it's not just kids, it's adults, right, at the skate park, and you watch them do these flips, the flips of the skateboard while they're jumping, while they're landing on a rail, going down a flight of stairs. There is no conscious thinking in that. They have locked that in their nervous system. It's happening too fast. The conscious mind thinks in tenths of a second. The subconscious thinks in milliseconds. That's the automaticity. Everyone gets muscle memory, but what's missed is that it's not muscle memory, it's nervous system memory. And the same way nervous system memory can be shaped for athletics and physical activity, it can be shaped for cognitive processing. So if we have this stack, let's going to call it a capability stack. And in this stack, we have what we know. And think about what you know. If you sat down to write a paper, there's things that are just going to come out of your head. You're just going to start writing. That's what you know. You put down the outline and you start building on it. You could build a PowerPoint deck or whatever, a presentation. That's what you know. And this is easily accessible. Then we have another part. This is can access. With prompts. Prompts are triggering associations. So you get the associations happening and you can bring it up into your conversation. This is what happens when you're in a meeting and you're watching a presentation and you remember things to think about. Some organizations have mastered this, and what they'll do is they have a way of asking people to come and present to them, and they always give them something more to work on because it gives them a chance to think about stuff. And then they bring the next level in and it prompts thoughts and questions. Those come up. And then even after the meeting, if the executives meet, they can also bring up other things. And this is how we start accessing other things. This is how we use more of what we know, because if left to our own, we know this much and we use this much. And the problem is that under pressure, we use that much. You put enough pressure on there because we have this thing called cognitive narrowing, and the cognitive narrowing happens. Now, let's take a look at a similar stack. I'm just going to draw it over here on a smaller scale, same concept. So you still have the what you know. And what I didn't draw over here, let me catch up. So down here, of this bottom stack is what we can access under pressure. So we're leaving a lot on the table because we can't access it under pressure. And you understand this. When you're under pressure in the heat of the moment, you blur out some things, maybe you react to some stuff, and then given some time, you come up with other ideas. The thing here is to let's get it to the point where we have that best version, access to that best version of ourselves in the heat of the moment, because the moment there's no heat in the moment, right? We've set it up so that it's just another moment that has to be addressed, and there's no tigers. And then we work through that. So then we still have so we got the no, and we have the access. But then over here, we can expand what we know or what we use under pressure. And we can use under pressure much more. Under pressure over here, small amount. Access, under pressure over here, large amount. This is with automaticity. Why is that? Because the automaticity if you have your 33,000 stimulus response cycle today, and you're just going along, if you hit a spike, if one of these causes a spike, you have a stress reaction. That stress reaction, it can either get modulated back down, which is what we teach, or it can go up higher. And it can go up higher. And then what happens up here, normal things still send you up, or they keep you up. And it's because you're already stressed and you're already biased towards looking at that. What we want is when that stress happens, it's absorbed, modulated, and we're ready for the next one. This is automaticity, because the early detection and the rapid recovery resolves it before it becomes something bigger. When you suppress it, the act of suppressing generates more of this. When you think about it, mull it over, ruminate, it generates more of this. You can imagine that under stress, a person is starting to not just react to the external, but now they're reacting to the internal. So this escalating that's happening here is because they're having reactions internally. They're thinking about what can happen, all the bad stuff, and they start stacking it one after the other. And now they've turned this thing into a big problem. This is here's a way of thinking about it, and this is something I'm gonna give you two views of something that most people already know. If I asked you on a given day, any given day, you would probably agree that, yeah, that's true. Most people would agree that visualizing the desired outcome results in a higher percentage of hitting that outcome. We know this from the 3 free throw examples in research, where the people practiced in their mind versus the people who practiced real free throws, and the ones who practiced in their mind improved as much. And there's so many experiments that have been done since then. And we've actually experienced it ourselves. What's interesting, it doesn't always work all the time. One of the reasons it doesn't always work is because the inverted U. If you don't have enough engagement and intensity, it's not going to work. And if you're overwhelmed and already stressed out, it's not going to work. When a person visualizes, and this is what they mean when they say on purpose. When you're being on purpose, you're kind of already in this zone here, because you're not worried about regrets of the past and anxiety about the future. You're in this state. I don't want to call it a flow state, because it's different than that. You're in that optimal pressure zone. When a person worries, they are often thinking about what they don't want to happen. and thinking about what they don't want to happen, they are making pictures of that thing, and that becomes visualization. Because remember, the network of neurons, aka subconscious, is just neural pathways with information passing through it. It's associations. It's like it's like artificial intelligence. If you're asking a question, it gives you an answer. But then when you provide context that's opposite of their question, of their response, and ask the same question in that kind of context, they come up with a completely different answer. The network of neurons works similar. It's all just associations. It's going to take the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance, when you're making those pictures, is going to tap right into that same thing. So let's say, using that example of worry, visualization, and that worry is making pictures of what you don't want. Put yourself in a situation where someone broke a rule, and that rule is causing you consternation, and you are ruminating about it, thinking about it, how you're going to deal with it. And you may be thinking about revenge, or you may be thinking about reprimands, whatever it is. But you're focused on all of the bad things that this is going to cause, and it just scales up and scales up. That's why we want to handle things early, because it starts to escalate. You're reacting to your own reactions. You're making pictures of how bad this is going to be. And then when you interact with the person, or when you're dealing with it, all those pictures of what you don't want are in your head. All those pictures are coming forward. And the same way visualization helped to make those basketball players improve their free throws with mental rehearsal, those pictures are moving you towards the very things that you don't want, versus getting stabilized early, or rapid recovery early, what I'm talking about here. Instead of this, you do this. Yeah, the bad things still happen, but it's just one time. It's just one bad thing. It still happened. And you're going to your response, instead of ruminating and focusing on the negative, you're going to do it, delay it, delegate it, or discard it. And in this case, you're going to delay it. You're going to work on it later. You might even delegate some of it. You might even ask someone to kind of do some analysis and pull information together for you. But what you're not going to do is focus on it right now and scale up. By coming back down, now you're able to think about this situation. So under worry, our inverted U, instead of being here, we're acting over here. By regulating, I'll call it recovery, rapid recovery, because it looks like stability. Because you're detecting and adjusting trajectory at the millisecond level, it looks like stability. The same way dynamic traction, or dynamic suspension is a better example, the same way dynamic suspension adjusts to the road surface in milliseconds, it feels like it's predicting the road. It's not predicting the road. It's just happening so quick that before you can even sense what's going on, it smooths it out. It's like an airplane, just adjusting the direction of travel very slightly. You don't even notice it. If they waited too long, they would be making larger corrections. That's what rapid recovery is. By doing rapid recovery, it brings you back into the area where you want to be, which is back in here. And now you have access to be able to come up with, you have access under pressure. So that's sort of that is the nutshell of it. And the point of talking about it here is that as leaders, we have to work on our own allostasis. So homeostasis is stabilizing at the status quo. Allostasis is stabilizing on an upward trajectory. The same thing that happens to law students in law school. They're constantly pushing on that memory and the critical thinking. And at the end, lawyers just know how to do this. Same thing happens in special ops. You're constantly pushing them, pushing them. That's why if you talk to a Marine, a Ranger, a Green Beret, a Navy SEAL, years later, you can tap into some of that same learning. And they don't walk around with it because the neural pathways are dormant, but the myelin is still there. And what's missing is the synapses. But if you get them focused, you put these folks in an obstacle course or something difficult, something challenging or whatever, you'll see it come back because the system very quickly can make neurotransmitter. 24 hours, you've got enough neurotransmitter to activate those neural pathways. And we want to keep doing that long after our 20s. So by 35, most people are doing whatever they, 95% of what we do is done by habit by age 35. What we want to do is keep putting demands on ourselves in different ways. You can do it with hobbies. You can do it with interests. I mean, an artist painting landscapes can do it. They can just keep adding more and more and more complexity demands on themselves. But as a business owner, as a leader of an area, what you want to have is a projection. So you're here. You want to have a projection of something in the future. And let's say, let's call this 2 years. And that projection to get there in 2 years is going to require a series of milestones that have to be met. Now, these milestones, you don't have the skill, capability, understanding, and all that yet. But what you're going to do is trust the system. You're going to trust the system that if you do enough research and enough work, and you're moving towards this, everything you do is toward that, then you will get there. And one of the things you can do is, let's say that you hire somebody. In the hiring, and here's the thing about hiring, right? You hire, you got the resume, you do the interviews. There's only so much you can do to make sure to get the person you think you're getting. But then when they come in, there's something different. Part of it is you want to have a development plan that builds this. You want development plans that do this, right? And I say every 2 years you update the development plan, and those development plans, 8 quarters, whatever. That the executives may only be 2 touch points over the year. With new employees, you may have 8 touch points over the 2 years. But after you hire the person, they're either going to be somebody who builds new capabilities that's going to help you towards the next milestone, or they're going to be somebody who improves existing. It's almost like the Ansoff matrix, where he talks about new products to existing customers or existing products to new customers. It's similar to that, but one person is just the way they're wired and the skills that they're bringing to the table. You can have them working on something bigger and the next bigger, better thing, and the other person who comes in and they don't have those skills, but you hired them because they have skills. You work with them on improving existing work, operationalizing things that are already in place. So you're always doing trial and error. You're always iterating. And part of this whole idea of the U is that it supports the iterative development. If you put so much pressure on yourself that it has to be perfect, all that increases, and these lines of the optimal pressure start to move up because you're adding internal pressure to yourself. You want to keep them wide. And one of the ways to keep that wide is by iterating. It's like trial and error, basically the same thing. It's doing skunk works, improving the skunk works, dropping it when it's not working, taking what you learned and do the next one. You get into the habit of doing that, you're going to be building this because you'll keep seeing new opportunities. And the better you get at seeing new opportunities, the better you get. And the better you get at taking advantage of those new opportunities, the better you get. So we want to build that allostasis. It's in your development plan. It's in the development plan of the people who are reporting to you, and it's in the development plan of the organization. But in order for you to do this consistently, we have to be paying attention to what's going on with others. And in the same way that I drew this as effort is low over here and it increases, guess what? Influence is high over here. So when you're doing it with early detection and a rapid recovery or a trajectory adjustment, influence is very high, and then it starts to drop. And then by the time you get on the conscious mind side, it's much more difficult. So remember, over here, we're talking about influence and effort with respect to adjusting the trajectory, regulation. So we'll put regulation here. And that's self or others. Regulation of self, regulation of others. The earlier you do it, and it's not rocket science. Everyone knows this, except that we didn't have the distinction that we can do things in the subconscious and actually attach it, because the belief has been that we can't change. And that belief has come because it's so hard to change consciously, but that's because we've been focusing on the conscious mind side. When you focus on the network of neurons side, you can change, and we're talking weeks, not years. And you can condition it to do these things, because the detection is a habit and the adjustment is a habit, because you're not adjusting, you're simply inquiring. And then that's the dynamic part. Once they inquire, you're staying regulated. If you don't stay regulated in here, this is not going to work as well. You've got to be able to stay regulated, which is why this is important. This is important because if you don't stay regulated, you're not going to be able to do this, because you have access to less capability under pressure. So by staying regulated, you actually increase this, because it's not really pressure. It's just access in the moment, because you're removing the pressure. That is the pressure curve. This, I would say, makes up the pressure curve. Do it when the effort required is low and when the influence is high. And this is prevention. This is your modulation, doing it real time. And this is corrective. It's all regulation. So when emotional intelligence talks about regulation, when you look under the covers and look in the details, they're talking about most of the stuff is correction, because it's already happened. Because emotional intelligence, when it was created, the belief was that you can't change, or that changing is so difficult, it's not worth putting the time and energy into that. And so the point was to have ways of recovering quickly. So the concepts work. The concepts are solid. We just have to condition them in so it's happening at the automaticity level, but there's not a ton of things you have to remember. You just have to condition yourself not to not wait. Now, you can't always come in right away, but you can. I say, let's talk about that later on. Just let them know. Just let the person see. Again, these are best practices. If you see that sensation happen and say, you know what, I know there's some things we got to talk about. Let's talk after the meeting, because there's some things I want to get some perspective. That's it. And now they are calmed down. They're no longer escalating. Otherwise, this thing is festering and festering inside and festering and festering. And, I don't want to over dramatize the thing too much. The point is, there's stuff going on. You need to be aware of it. And the way to become aware of it is to ask. And by asking, you've already interrupted the process for them. And you've stopped yourself from escalating, because what can happen is you're seeing them react, and now it starts a sensation inside of you. So all of this, early detection, early rapid recovery, That's how we attack the pressure curve. So there is no pressure curve. It's just an arc of performance because we're staying in that zone. So I'll tune in on Monday. We'll do the next talk and keep building on this. So I've got 6 talks total. I probably will only get to 2 next week because I've got some road trips, but we'll cover the 6 and finish up again with a nice tie-in of how all this plays together into development plans. If you do nothing else or take nothing else away, think of development plans and allostasis as, think of them together, that you're using the development plans to drive allostasis because allostasis creates an upward trajectory arc as opposed to a homeostasis arc, a status quo arc. This is status quo, this is upward trajectory. And that's makes all the difference. And here's the deal. This is all about scaling. So my sweet spot is working with companies from 10 to 200 people. And the challenges in there is that the owner or leader CEO has to keep leveling up. They have to keep leveling up because you first add a leadership team, then you're adding more leaders to that team. And then those leaders get direct reports. Each one of those requires different demands, different things from you. You have to keep upgrading your identity to get to that 200. Once you get to the 200, you've got the identity pretty much shaped and you can roll. That's why there's a big bottleneck. If you look at Alex Charfrin's work, there's a big bottleneck between that million to 10 million, a big bottleneck, because it's very difficult to break through that because it's an identity shift that has to happen. And guess what? Under pressure, it's difficult to shift identity because of the same things we're talking about. All right, I'm going to leave it there. We'll tune in on Monday. I'll see you.